This is the GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 441, part 3 of 3, entitled Masculist Advice to Governments. Carrying straight on. Bullet. Push girls to FIP up. Gender politicians need to push the idea onto girls that they have to FIP up or pay a very heavy price of not getting a man. As masculist ideas spread across the planet, those women who keep fluffy attitudes will pay a horrible price by being severely punished by young men by not getting one. Instead, they'll be spat at for being fluffy, man-slaving vermin. Bullet. Parliamentary Gender Equality Committees. One of the major political goals of the Masculists is the establishment of parliamentary gender equality committees that consist of half female feminists and half male masculists, so that governments treat men's and women's issues equally, which is far from being the case today. In today's world, that's June 2021, most men are as monoconscious as nearly all women, so a lot has to be done to menfair the gender laws. The male masculist half of these gender equality committees will need to work hard for the menfairing of the gender laws so that a sex war can be avoided, so that billions of men can be freed from the traditional manslave role of the male by forcing women to FIP up or to rot on the shelf. Most feminists today are so brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street, that they are extremely biased, bigoted towards the masculist claim that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since women manslave men for decades. That makes, for example, men's rape of women seem small beer, since even women admit that being raped by a man is a lesser gender crime against a woman than being enslaved by a man with no pay, no kids for 3 decades. Yet this is what fluffies routinely do to men in their billions, a massive gender crime that is pushing the masculists to war. Look at the US Civil War, which was largely about the moral abomination of Negro slavery. Masculists feel the same about man-slavery and are prepared to go to war against fluffies if the gender equality committees do not destroy fluffydom soon. These committees will also need to help bring in the para, since it is likely that millions of fluffies will strongly object to being forced to grow up and to FIP up by the legislation of the para. Millions of fluffies will fight the legislation of the para tooth and nail. The masculist push for the fipping of women terrifies them. Bullet. Systematically eliminate sexual discriminations against men across the board. The masculists in these committees will need to remove systematically the many legal discriminations against men across the board. For example, more severe punishments for equal crimes compared with women, conscription for men but not for women, etc. Many examples. Remove them all. Bullet. Promote masculist consciousness. There's not much point in the gender politicians creating men-fair gender laws unless the general population goes along with these changes in the law. In a democracy, the laws cannot be too far in advance of the attitudes and expectations of the population. So the masculists themselves and the gender politicians will need to work closely together to educate the public on the importance of the men-fairing of the gender laws, so that both sexes, especially men, are made conscious how women oppress men, so that men can be freed from their traditional male role of being a manslave to a woman, working for decades for a woman. This masculinist consciousness can be promoted in many ways by media articles, in TV programs, by men's studies courses in universities, by the publication of masculinist books, etc. so that the public is made aware that masculism is as important to men as feminism is to women, so that the public approves of the new menfair gender laws made by the gender equality committees. Bullet. The creation of masculist groups in every high school, every campus. Most new social political movements start at the universities, since these institutions consist of large numbers of bright young people whose minds are more open to new ideas than older adults who are weighed down by financial and child-raising burdens, who have less time and energy to think about new issues. So educating the young in the high schools and colleges is a high priority for Masculists. This is especially true for the high schools, since it is at the critical age of 16 in middle school that 80% of girls choose to become fluffy crappers, choosing to study fluffy crap majors that will make them fluffies in their 30s, who cannot afford to pay for their own apartment due to the little money they earn with their fluffy crap diplomas that the economy does not value. So they go looking around in their 30s for some gullible, ignorant manslave to work for her so she can raise her kids in the apartment that he pays for. Then a decade later, drag him to the hated fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court and financially crucify him, as well as ripping his kids away from him. With a masculist group in every high school, young male classmates will be in a position to put powerful moral pressure on potential fluffy female classmates to force them to fib up, to study career-competent majors, especially math and the sciences, so that they do not expect as adults to be a fluffy and to parasite off the money and labour of a man, thus manslaving him for decades, a capital gender crime in the eyes of the masculists. Bullet. Give government grants to masculist academics and professors. Masculist ideas are already fairly well crystallised, but there is still plenty of scope for further masculist thinking. Whole libraries have been written on feminist issues, and since men's role and men's psychology are just as complex as women's, then potentially whole libraries should also be written on masculist themes. So government grants should be given to academics and professors to write on masculist topics, to improve them, to elaborate them, so that these improved ideas can be spread to the public, thus liberating men and indirectly liberating both sexes. Bullet. Promote gender politicians to take an even-handed view. In today's world, politicians tend to talk in monoconscious terms, since like monoconscious feminists, that is all they know. They are not biconscious, since they have not yet heard about masculist ideas, so agree with the monoconscious feminists that gender oppression is a one-way street. When there are a large number of masculists, if a politician expresses monoconscious bias, he or she can be heckled vigorously, so that that politician gets the clear message that the masculists, and in time men in general, do not tolerate his monoconscious gender bias and bigotry, so threaten him with not being re-elected if he or she continues with such monoconscious bias. Those politicians who take an even-handed view, that is, a biconscious view, will be given approval by the masculists and offered votes as a reward, thus promoting a masculist and biconscious attitude in the politician. Bullet. Parents and teachers need to be pushed to promote fitness in girls. It's critical to the masculists that women fip up. One of the main political goals of the masculists is the fipping of women, since masculists are very conscious that most of men's gender issues will be solved when we all live in a fip society, in which girls are socialised by parents and educated by teachers and professors to be fips, so that they don't expect fluffy style to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him and thus making her a hated gender criminal on a massive scale by the masculists. So the masculists aim to create a masculist zeitgeist, that it is taboo for young women to be fluffies. They are to be socialised and educated by society to be fips, or be exterminated slowly by being totally ignored by men, since in time nearly all men will have been masculisted and hence not tolerate a hated, manslaving, bloody fluffy. Such women are seen by masculists to be worthy of extermination slowly, to be hated, to have their fluffy, manslaving parasite genes removed from the gene pool so that all women become FIPs, the very definition of a FIP society. Bullet, etc. Once the parliamentary gender equality committees are established and men's studies departments are set up at universities, there will be many more masculist issues that will come to light and will need to be addressed. This flyer is already quite long, so I'll stop here. Hopefully, this flyer itself will be read by many politicians around the world, and hopefully not too many years into the future. Since the divorce court massacring of men is a daily occurrence that needs to be removed so that men are prepared to be fathers again, so that the birth rate climbs again, so that whole populations are not wiped out, which is definitely the current trend. Thus, there are many important reasons why masculists need to advise governments so that as a species we can continue to survive and not wipe ourselves out due to lack of reproduction. One of the most important political issues of our century, the masculist century. Last century was the feminist century. Now it's men's turn to liberate ourselves, that is, from manslavery, by eliminating fluffy parasites and by menfairing the gender laws. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 440 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.